Thank you, Adam. Marcia, is there anything you would like to add about yourself before we start diving in?
Sure. First of all, I am a middle-aged woman with brown hair, brown eyes, olive skin. I'm wearing a lavender shirt and a black blazer. And I just want to say that I'm very excited to be invited by Adam and yourself today to talk to this audience about accessibility, and really appreciate the invitation. Looking forward to a good show.
Thank you. And my own description is similar to her, but obviously Adam already has said that I am older than Marcia. And I have curly hair, but otherwise similar coloring. I'm wearing today a striped black and white shirt. With that, I would like to get started. Let's talk a little bit.
I think you should just mention why you just did a physical description for anyone really.
We've done a physical description for any participants that may have visual disabilities. So we want to give them the same context that those that can see us. We want to give them the same context and the same information so that we can even out the playing field. Yes. All right. So let's talk about disability first. Did you know that 16% of the world population lives with a disability? And this is according to the World Health Organization. When I first heard that, it seemed too big to me. But when you start thinking about what is a disability, there are so many different groupings, some of which is represented on our slide here. There are people who have hearing disabilities. They may not be able to hear at all. They might be deaf, or they might have lost some amount of hearing. They might have vision disabilities. This includes blindness as well as color blindness, learning differences, mobility, dexterity, epilepsy or seizure type of disorders, speech disorders, orthopedic disorders. I'm sorry, I meant disabilities, and so forth. So there are really quite a lot of disabilities that the population around us in the US as well as in the world have. And in fact, when we look at the US, another way of looking and categorizing disabilities is based on permanent disabilities versus the temporary ones. So in a given year, there are more than 21 million people with disabilities in the US. In addition to those that have a permanent disability, such as someone who have lost an arm, or a temporary disability, such as somebody who maybe broke their arm and have lost the use of their arm for a certain amount of time until they heal. There are also situational disabilities. And a good example of that is somebody who just had a newborn baby and needs to carry that baby for a specific, for a certain number of hours in a day, will also not have the use of one of their arms. Yet another way of looking at disabilities are, some disabilities are more apparent or more visual than, visually apparent than other ones. You might realize somebody is missing a limb, or you might be able to identify somebody is blind because they have a walking stick. But when you look at folks around you, you might not quite realize who has color blindness because that is not visual, or who maybe has a learning disability. So when we think about all of that, 16% starts making more sense. Now, talking about accessibility, people with disabilities navigate our physical world using some tools. So that could be a crutch or a wheelchair if you've lost a limb. Similarly, to navigate the digital world, people with disabilities can use assistive technologies. Some examples of assistive technologies are things such as a screen reader, braille displays, voice recognition software, screen magnifiers, and so forth. However, simply providing the assistive technologies to people with disabilities does not solve the problem. It is also important that the content or the code, which is also content, is enabled so that these technologies could be used. Beyond that, there are some other solutions that need to be provided in the code and the content in order to make your websites or tools and technologies be usable by people with disabilities. Some of these other solutions is making the color contrast adjustable if necessary, or ensuring that there is sufficient contrast so that people with disabilities can actually read the text that is on your screen, enabling the screen reader. The screen reader will not be able to explain and read out what's on the screen if it is not, if the content is not enabled. Images need alt text on them to describe what they are, unless they are a decorative image. So there's quite a lot of considerations here. And according to the W3C, digital accessibility means when we create our websites or our technologies, our web apps, such that people with disabilities can use them. So a lot goes into designing and in developing the applications. So now that we talked about disabilities and accessibility, let's take a look at what's really happening in our short-term timeline. Just in June, about a month from now, the Canadian Accessibility Act, called the ACA, has a deadline. And a year from that, the EU will have the European Accessibility Act deadline. And these acts have requirements for anybody who publishes a website, a web app, a technology, or a tool. However, this is not brand new. Accessibility has been developing as a field for quite a long time. And there is the WCAG that has been moving along and getting further developed. This is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, is what WCAG stands for. And we are currently at 2.2. So in order to be able to understand this better, let's dive in, and let me start asking Marcia to explain it to us better. First of all, Marcia, can you let me know, like, why should my organization really care about accessibility? So all of this is happening, but what if I am not compliant? Do I really need to pay attention?
Sure. So great question. As you showed just a couple of slides ago, 16% of the world's population lives with a disability. That's about 1.3 billion people. And as a group, that is the largest minority in the world. And it is the one minority that any one of us can enter at any time. According to the Valuable 500, these 1.3 billion people represent approximately $8 trillion of annual disposable income. And if you factor in disability adjacent people, family, friends, that can be as much as $13 trillion. By becoming accessible, you increase your potential market reach and customer base. In the EU, the US, the EU, and Canada, you can't sell your products to the government or any institution that receives money from the government. This could include schools, hospitals, museums. It's also a very large market segment representing pretty extensive revenue potential that you might be missing out on. In Canada and the EU, the private sector is being phased into accessibility regulations. And as Milen showed, there are some deadlines looming that you need to be ready for. Accessibility is a business imperative. Of course, you want to avoid fines and reduce your legal risk for accessibility lawsuits, all of which could be very damaging to your brand and your reputation. But the last thing is you should consider that accessibility makes your websites, your applications easier to use, easier to comprehend. It improves the overall usability for everyone. And little known fact, it even helps with your search engine optimization because accessible websites, they tend to have a better structured markup.
I
Back to
see.
you,
Those are very convincing answers and reasons as to why we do need to consider accessibility, from business sense to even making our products better. Just those two by themselves would be sufficient reasons, and you gave us many more. So let's dive a little bit deeper. What about WCAG? Can you help us understand what it is and a bit more about the history?
Sure. So WCAG stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. They're put out by the World Wide Web Consortium, or the W3C. And they're an internationally agreed upon set of standards established to help content authors and developers create accessible content. And by one quick thing, by web content, it's not just websites, it's also your mobile apps, it's also gaming, it's also PDFs and documents that are made available on your websites. So these guidelines are a list of testable criteria that are grouped under 4 principles. And there are 3 increasing levels of compliance. There's level A, which are kind of the deal breakers. If you're breaking a level A guideline, you are making it impossible for persons who are using assistive technologies from using your software. At the level AA compliance, you're making it easier for users of assistive technologies. And level AAA are kind of extreme best practices. They're kind of hard to reach, and almost no one is developing to this level, but they're out there as a stretch goal. Currently, WCAG 2.1 AA is the recommended standard. The EU is enforcing to this level, and Canada, Australia, and the US will soon do the same. So this slide here is just a little bit of history and background, which I think is important for people to know. I guess we're starting here with 2006. It's sort of a landmark year because that's when one of the earliest legal cases in the US happened, when the National Federation for the Blind sued Target for inaccessible website features. And it was one of the first cases to come to a written decision. At the time, WCAG 1.0 version was around. It actually had been released sooner. I think that was back in 1999. And then we move forward to 2008 here, where 2.0 came out, and then a bit of a jump to 2018, where 2.1 came out. And 2.1 largely focuses on mobile apps, because back in 2008, the iPhone came out. Or actually, I think it came out in 2007, but mobile started becoming very, very ubiquitous. And there was a need for mobile apps and guidelines around making them accessible to come out. And that's why 2.1 was released. The other thing that happened in the US is Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act merged with WCAG 2.0. And so that's the current level that's being enforced by Section 508. Then just moving forward through 2020, WCAG 2.2 was released, and this was also when the European Union started enforcing accessibility, starting with public sector in the web apps, followed in 2021 by public sector mobile apps. There was a little bit of time given for the mobile apps. It takes a little bit longer for those to come into compliance. Then around 2022 timeline, Canada started jumping in with their accessibility mandates around the public sector. 2023, Canada also started folding in private sector, and WCAG 2.2 came out. Just a little bit of a mention about what happened with 2.2. Really, the aim there was to improve accessibility for users with cognitive and neurological disabilities. There were some other changes around an enhanced focus visibility and text resizing, but primarily for cognitive and neurological disabilities. So that's a little bit of history up until where we are now. So this slide is showing the next couple of years and beyond, what's happening here in 2024. So essentially in June, Canada will be enforcing at the small private sector. So this will wrap up sort of the last bit of sectors in terms of compliance in Canada. I'll also mention a little bit of what recently happened. I think it was in April this month. The U.S. Department of Justice announced that it is going to be adopting WCAG 2.1 level AA for the ADA Title II for both web and mobile apps. And Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act is really focused on the U.S. state and local governments around websites and mobile applications. And so this is the first time that we've heard that 2.1 AA is coming for the US. And then the big deadline in 2025 for the European Union. This is now wrapping up the sort of the final sector, the private sector. This is a big deadline for everyone to be working towards compliance. And then in 2020, we're not sure yet, but we do know that WCAG is currently working on the 3.0 version. When that comes out, we need to be ready for that. It's going to definitely include some more guidelines around cognitive disabilities. It's reportedly also going to have more of a numbered scoring system that's a little bit less focused on the absolutes, whether you comply or not, and more sort of driving towards a notion of substantial conformance. There's also reportedly going to be a medaling system, bronze, silver, and gold. And these scoring systems are going to be included in your VPATs. Well, I think we'll talk about that a little bit later. But it's supposed to make it more simpler for your customers who are making decisions on purchasing and comparing companies to their level of compliance in making decisions on whether or not they're going to purchase your software. We also know that some VR and XR guidelines are going to be coming out, along with some guidelines around your maturity modeling, your sort of the holistic view of your accessibility efforts beyond just the outcome of whether or not you're accessible. So things such as do your processes include testers with disabilities? Are you doing research with persons with disabilities and such?
Great.
That's you.
Yeah, that was very informative, and certainly more and more accessibility is coming. And I see that there's been a progression from federal to the public sector, then to private sector. And then it was first with larger organizations, and smaller ones were not that, didn't have to meet the accessibility requirements, but it kept getting smaller and smaller. So there's more and more accessibility coming our way. And we've talked about here about Canada and the EU, but since we are in the globalization world here at Lingoport, and many of our attendees are also coming from from that side. Beyond European and Canadian accessibility acts, is there any other global accessibility regulations that we need to be aware of?
Yes, most definitely. Accessibility is a globally recognized imperative, and there are many governmental policies related to web accessibility. A really good resource for this information is on the W3C website. There is a link that we're going to provide for you. Yes, Milen is showing it for you here. This is a screenshot of this website on the W3C, which essentially is a table that lists the laws in the various countries. So yeah, essentially the country or region, the name of the law or policy, the dates that those policies were enacted, sort of the type of policy, the scope, and the WCAG version that that policy is based on. From just these first three rows that are being shown here, I think the EU, Finland, and France, you can see that there is a variation in the WCAG version and compliance level. It's quite an effort to keep track of all the markets that you sell in or might potentially want to sell in, and try to address each country or region individually. So as we mentioned before, globally, the most advanced version of compliance level is in the European Union at WCAG 2.1 AA. But we know soon that the US will be joining, and the rest of the world will eventually reach that level as well.
I see. So if I am looking at taking my products and my webpage and everything else that you've mentioned, the PDFs and my mobile apps, to a few different target countries, let's say France, Finland, and Japan, what I would do then is to take a look at the W3C chart and see what WCAG version is recommended, and whoever is the strictest, I should just go with them. So WCAG 2.1 AA seems to be a good target, but if one of my target locales, say, needs a 2.2, then I better enable everything to be 2.2, because accessibility is something that is done in the source content in your code once, similar to internationalization. You're not going to do it separately for each country. You're going to do it once, and you want to pick the strictest, right? Okay. All right. Let's understand a bit more, since it's really WCAG that we need to implement. You've mentioned 4 different principles before. Can you get a little bit more into that, and then we can see, yeah, how one would implement WCAG?
Sure. So yes, WCAG is built on 4 key principles, and that is to ensure that web content is perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. A really good acronym to remember these principles is POUR, P-O-U-R, which you see here. Perceivable, starting with P, perceivable means that users must be able to perceive the information presented using alternatives. And alternatives can be things like alt text for images that are on your page, or captions for videos. So let's go to O. Operable ensures that users can interact with all the controls and interactive elements, for example, using a keyboard. All assistive technology relies on keyboard navigation, so it's really important. It's a really important place to start, and your prioritization is to work around keyboard navigation. So that's going to be a great place to start for your accessibility journey. Understandable content has to be very clear. It will limit confusion and ambiguity. Some things that you do in the understandable space are things like setting the language of the page. So people who are using screen readers can hear the page being read in their particular language. The reading level of the content should be kept at a level that's understandable. Use of abbreviations should be kept to a minimum for sure. Then on the robust side, really, that means the content is going to be compatible with various assistive technologies and platforms, and ensuring that accessibility across those different devices and user agents is assured. So these four principles work together to create a foundation for a more inclusive and accessible web for everyone.
Great. So this was actually interesting because the understandable part of 4 is very close to localization in a way, because to have successful localization, you need your content to be clear. You mentioned acronyms, but similarly idioms or anything that has a cultural significance or meaning in one culture but won't translate. We look for those, and the recommendations are to have good source content so that it can be easily localizable and can produce quality. What's interesting is in an earlier question, when we talked about, I think it was question 1, why should I pay attention to accessibility? You've mentioned that enabling accessibility also creates much better user interfaces, even for the source country, even for for people that don't need accessibility, people that don't have disabilities. Overall, the product becomes better. The UI, the usability is better. So not only is the product and its usability better, but accessibility is going to help us also have better localized results if we do this. So I find them related here. All right, so we've talked a bit about implementation, and like you mentioned keyboards. I've mentioned alt text before, making sure that the screen reader can read the text and is enabled for the language that the individual is going to be receiving the information in. But beyond implementation, there is testing. In fact, testing is maybe even comes before implementation. And it's very important for accessibility. Can you dive into testing, Marcia?
Sure. So, yeah, let's talk a little bit about testing and specifically automation around testing. So currently, really accessibility has a bit of a low test automation penetration rate. Around 30% of the guidelines can be automated today through code analysis. There's some really great commercially available tools out there, such as XDev tools from DQ, as well as Wave from WebAIM. But about 70% are still currently having to be tested manually. We know manual testing, of course, is fairly expensive, but being able to hand off to manual testers with 30% of the errors corrected is going to significantly help you for sure. But the other thing too is to know that some of these automated tests are sometimes not enough. So a really simple example is around alt text. So code analysis can tell if alt text is present or not. Images need alt text sometimes, but code analysis can't tell if the image is decorative. And in the case of an image being decorative, it doesn't need alt text. And so, but currently the code analysis won't tell you that. Code analysis will also not tell you if the alt text is correct. It actually matches the image. So this is something that has to be further evaluated by manual testers. So one thing I will say about manual testing is that it should be done by persons with disabilities and those persons who have or who are native users of the assistive technologies. And lastly, there's a lot of promise with AI to significantly increase the automation of testing going forward.
Right. So you test and then you create bugs, I assume, or a list of issues, things that need to be fixed and enabled so that your software code, web page, etc., can pass the accessibility requirements. But what do we do with all these issues that are found? How would you prioritize and rank them?
Sure. Yeah. So as you mentioned, sort of what's the outcome after testing? You know, typically you'll get an audit report, excuse me, that's created with a list of the defects. And a natural way to think about prioritization is sorting by level A, those deal breakers, and then double A. But some other considerations that you need to think about in terms of prioritization, specifically when within the level A's themselves, are things like, are those accessibility defects in code that's currently scheduled for a revision or an update? That might change how you prioritize. If it's already going to go through an update, you might put that as a lower priority. Are your accessibility issues in something called the happy path? So happy path is a term used in UX design, and it's really the sort of error-free path that you want your users to take to achieve a desired result. So if you have accessibility errors in that path, you want to prioritize them up to get them fixed as soon as possible. Do your defects impact the user's ability to navigate? We know navigation is very important, especially for people with assistive technologies. So you'll want to address those. Are the defects on pages or screens that get a ton of traffic or usage? These are just a few ways that you might want to consider prioritization. You can also look and take a little bit more of a quantitative approach to prioritization, maybe looking at the number of defects, the types of defects, the severity levels that those defects are, as along with the level of effort that it's going to take to fix those errors. And this will all factor into your remediation plan. The accessibility consultants that you work with will be able to help you navigate these prioritizations and help you along your remediation efforts.
Great. So there are things that we will absolutely have to do, because if it is not AA, most likely 2.1, we won't be able to pass and be accessible. But in terms of other types of issues, I want to call them nice to have, or maybe it's not nice to have, but it's beyond the minimum of a AA. There are more things that can be done. Then the prioritization in terms of, oh, this makes sense, we can add that right here in this part of our development. It's not too big of an effort, versus what you said previously, Marcia. Oh, we're going to rewrite this portion of our code, so let's not implement it now, we can implement it later, type of considerations come into plan, and then a project plan is created, which leads to our question of a roadmap, which includes part of a project plan. But if you need to think about how to add accessibility in your company, this is what you might you'll probably be going through. So at very high level, your roadmap starts with some preparation. Learning about accessibility and educating yourself and the organization is step one. Being in this in today's webinar is part of that education. And once your organization is ready to sign up and make accessibility an initiative, then we really get started at that point. You need to first do an audit. But before you can do an audit, it's important to understand what it is you're going to be auditing. And for that, we recommend that if you were to engage us, for example, we like to get some familiarization with the product. And what that means is we want to understand the different UIs that are in the product, what the different workflows are, what are the different personas that would be using the product, and based on that, understand and plan how we will be doing the audit. We do create then a scope for the audit, which will also include a lot of testing. Once that budget is approved and we can move forward, we need to make sure we have the right resources. Resources would be those involved in doing the audit. So an accessibility lead, someone very, very knowledgeable like Marcia, as well as accessibility testers to be able to go through all these workflows and UIs and find where the issues are under the direction of the lead. We also need to make sure we have resources which will be able to deal with the changes and remediation in the UI UX components. So we need designers, and we definitely need also developers, individuals who can go and fix add, for example, keyboard navigation, add alt text and integration with closed captions, etc. Past the preparation, once we have the budget and we're now moving forward, we will go and do the audit. The audit will be heavily relying on testing, and testing will include both automated testing as well as human testers. And as we discussed before, that will create a lot of issues, a lot of bugs. You can put those in a bug tracking system like Jira. There can be also a findings report that can be generated if your management wants to see that. And then past the audit, we also like to provide a prioritization with a project plan. These are the things you need to solve right now. These would be nice to have so that there is a common understanding between your product team and us as to what makes sense to solve now. Because we know the roadmap for accessibility, but you know the roadmap for your own product development. And this is where the discussion of, should we fix this? Oh no, this component will be rewritten. Let's wait kind of discussions happen. Past that, once we have come to an agreement on exactly what it is, what needs to be done and implemented, a scoping can be done for the implementation. And then the implementation itself starts with the individuals who are the UI, UX designers and software developers who will actually go through every page, every piece of code, every source code or content that you have, and make the necessary implementation changes. And as these implementation changes are done, code is being refactored, testing starts. So testing was done initially as part of the audit, and now we're doing testing again to make sure that those have been resolved. So it's regression testing. Some things maybe still linger, you go back and you fix it again and you test it. And you keep doing that until the regression testing will show that accessibility compliance has been reached. And at that point, there's a sign off that yes, your product, your web pages and so forth are accessible. If desired, after sign off, a VPAT report can be created, a VPAT or other similar reports. These help your organization publish and let the procurement and department or customers as to what accessibility has been implemented. And maybe if you have some gaps, you would be documenting those as well. And this would be very helpful in terms of notifying your customers what has happened. And it shows that you're providing the information, including the gaps and some things that you want to solve. Once your VPAT report has been created, you're actually not done. The VPAT reports will need to be updated on a yearly basis when you continue selling your products internationally. Also, what's important to know is just like internationalization, accessibility is also an ongoing discipline. So you might have fixed all of your accessibility issues once. However, development continues, so it's always possible for accessibility issues to creep back in. And there has to be ongoing maintenance and checking and scanning and testing and fixing the issues. So you can go that way and always test and fix the issues. But again, just like internationalization, what is recommended is that you actually learn how to do accessibility correctly by incorporating accessibility early on in your design and in your initial development. And that is called universal design. So designing applications and web apps and websites, etc., that is universal. It's for everyone. It's also for people with disabilities and so forth. So this is at high level what our roadmap looks like if you'd be working with us. And we do provide quite a lot of services that helps you go through all of the steps of the roadmap. So the audit, the testing, as mentioned, the requirements, reporting. This is the initial bug reports and maybe some findings report. At the very end, a VPAT report, and doing the remediation, just like any other project with a project plan, designers, and implementation team. So we can provide turnkey implementation services for accessibility, or if you already are doing accessibility, but now there are these global deadlines and need some help, need to augment your team, we can do that as well. And with that, we've come to the questions.
Okay, I'm back. Hi, everyone. I have to silence everything dinging here. All right, so here we go. We have some questions that were sent ahead of time. I want to remind everybody there's the Q&A interface as questions come up in your head, and go ahead and type your questions there, and there's no reason to be concerned if you feel like your question is too simple or something like that. All right, so the first question I have is, what are the legal repercussions for being non-compliant?
Okay, I'll take that one.
Okay.
So, so first of all, in the US, essentially there are definitely fines and legal ramifications in the US for the first violation of the Section 508 that can result in fines up to about $55,000. I think each subsequent violation could result to fines up to, I think, 110,000. In addition, organizations and businesses that receive federal funding may have their funds revoked if you're not compliant. With the Accessible Canada Act, I believe it's essentially enforced through some financial penalties as well. I think from as much as 75,000 Canadian dollars for a minor violation. A minor violation might be something like failing to publish an accessibility plan. It could go up as high as 250,000 Canadian dollars for very serious violations. One thing to note, and this speaks to Milen talking about the VPAD and the reporting in Canada as part of the compliance, the ACA requires that organizations prepare and publish their accessibility plans, and they have to be updated every 3 years at a minimum. In the European Union, the EAIA is going to become, as we saw, fully enforceable throughout the market in 2025 and can result in fines of up to 100,000 euros for non-compliance. And in addition to fines, non-compliance in the US and the EU and Canada can result in very costly site modifications for you. So if you have to fix things after the fact, as opposed to addressing them through universal design, as Milen mentioned, it's very costly to do so. You could be prevented from releasing new features, if you can't go to market, if they're inaccessible. And of course, persons with disabilities who can't access your products and services due to non-compliance may choose to take direct legal action, resulting in very legal costly fees and of course the damage to reputation.
All right, that was a very thorough answer. It sounds very expensive. It adds up quickly. All right. For deaf users, is captioning seen as a sufficient measure or is sign language preferred?
Oh, that's a really great question. So captioning's the baseline. Captioning's the minimum. ASL or any sign language, depending on the market, is sort of a level AAA compliance to WCAG. So it's great if you can meet that, and as you have live either virtual or in-person events, it's really recommended to have sign language.
Okay, great.
And I'll add to that sign language. You mentioned the ACL, that's the American Sign Language. So if you have an English product or interface, you need to know who is your market, because you may have to create sign language also with British Sign Language, because these are different languages. And every language has its own sign language. So it is a lot more expensive and takes more effort.
And one last point around that too, for the deafblind, transcripts are very important as well. So transcripts for any of your video content will help them be able to consume the content through screen readers and Braille, their Braille devices.
Leading to me to remember to tell everyone that there will be a recording that is sent to all registrants. So there's that. And if you had closed caption turned on, which is in the menu on the bottom, you would see print for what I'm saying, which I've turned on. And it's interesting to see what you're saying being reflected in print right away. Pardon me, as I'm really naive to all this stuff, so I'm learning with all of you. All right, We have another question here. What is VPAT? What is a VPAT report? I think, Milen, you talked about that quite a bit. What is VPAT Section 508?
Okay, I'll answer that one too. So a little bit of history. In 1998, Congress amended the Rehabilitation Act in the United States. That was back in the Rehabilitation Act went out in 1973, and the amendment was to require federal agencies to make their electronic and information technology accessible to persons with disabilities. This is Section 508, and it is a web accessibility law that applies to public sector organizations private sector organizations that contract with federal agencies. So if you want to sell to the federal government or any company that gets money from the federal government in schools, hospitals, etc., you must have a VPAT or an ACR. So VPATs and ACRs are two very key documents in the world of accessibility. VPAT stands for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. It's like a report card for your digital products to outline how well your products meet accessibility standards. It's a tool then that you hand off to companies to communicate to them your product's accessibility and the features and the level of compliance. An ACR, on the other hand, is the accessibility conformance report. It's sort of the behind the scenes documentation that sort of supports what's claimed in the VPAT. It provides more details around the testing, the evaluation results, and yeah, just sort of some background information around that. In short, the VPAT gives you an overview, of your accessibility compliance, and the ACR sort of provides the evidence backing those claims.
All right, thanks, Marcia. We just had another question come in. What are best practices for writing alt text? Do you have to describe every single data point on a graphic or just the highlights? Is there a point where alt text is too long?
Yes, yeah, there are definitely best practices around alt text, and there are some tools out there that can help you get started. You don't have to describe every level of detail. I think essentially just being able to describe the gist, describe the important features. If persons are involved in the image, describing their expressions. So persons that are using screen readers, for instance, you don't want to make it hard. You don't want to create a book for them to have to listen to as their screen readers reading that alt text. You want to make it in as short as possible to get the meaning of the image across.
All right, all right. I'm going to close with a personal experience of why this is so important. Okay, this is years ago. I used to sell data visualization software. It was a lot of math and graphics. And I went up to a meeting in the Chicago Loop with a financial organization, and I got in there, and here I am to show visualization software. And the executive I was meeting with immediately noticed the service dog sitting next to his desk, and all kinds of equipment so that he could read a screen. And we had a really good conversation about this. But the moral of the story is, because I worked with him and how he could see and represent data and circulate that to other members of the bank, I had never had as fast a purchase order, and it was one of the largest ones that the company had to date. So ancient history, but it really shows you that this is a group that is underestimated in terms of purchasing power and importance. And so we need to pay attention to it. With that, I'm going to thank you both. Milen and Marcia put a lot of thought into this webinar and the content. Again, the recordings will be available to you. And we're working on our next webinar. I hope you'll all get an invitation and find out about it, of course. But thank you. This has been great and very informative. All right.